Thanks for joining me again in one of the world's best locations for photography. I mean, look at that. Roll the titles. Coming up on this month's show, we measure things, we break things, and we bring things back to life. Welcome to our August edition of Photography Online, and what a show we have lined up for you this month. Now, this featured at number 5 in our top 10 locations last month, and in just a few moments we'll be showing you what's at number 4. But before that, we thought you might like to see what one of the most expensive cameras on the market today is all about.
So how much? 10,000. Okay, let me see how much I've got. There's 10, 20, 40, 80, 100, 970, 9,980, 9,990, 10,000. Pounds! Okay, let's face it, not many people can justify spending £10,000 on a camera, and that's before you've started even thinking about lenses. But let's just dream for a moment. No, not that dream. Play the other one that says dream. Honestly. Okay, before we begin, let's get the first issue out of the way. I hate mirrorless cameras, can't stand them, and I refuse to look through an electronic viewfinder. So to give myself the maximum chance of getting along with a mirrorless camera, I removed the viewfinder altogether, just so that it didn't drive me up the wall. Okay, now that's out of the way, we can get on with the important stuff and see what a 102 megapixel camera is capable of. I took the GFX 100 to photograph a number of different situations, from high contrast, shooting directly into the light, shooting in low light, shooting at high ISOs, and even in a swarm of flesh-eating midges to give it a full workout. With 101,756,920 pixels, took me ages to count them, it should come as no surprise that the detail of the images are breathtaking. Coupled with the Fuji GF lenses, the sharpness and the clarity of this camera is simply the best I've ever used. You can make huge prints from these files, which are oozing with detail. Or you can crop into tiny areas, if you've cocked up the composition that is, without seeing too much degradation in the quality. In fact, if you crop 75% of the image, you're still left with a 25 megapixel camera. The more attentive of you will have noticed a large dust spot in the top left-hand corner of that last image. And I have to say that this seems to be a real issue with the GFX 100. It got to the point where I was having to manually clean the sensor before each session. Yet still I was getting contamination on many images. One thing which did surprise me is the dynamic range and high ISO performance. The more pixels you squeeze onto a sensor, the smaller those pixels need to be, and therefore the less light each one gathers. Therefore, I was expecting the GFX 100 to show some serious noise issues at anything higher than around ISO 1600, but that's just not the case. Look at these test shots I took of a neighbour's house. This one is at full frame at ISO 100, but we're going to just look at this section at 100%. Here's the same section at ISO 800, and as you can see, there's no noticeable noise at all. In fact, life's only so long, so let's skip 1600 and 3200, because trust me, you won't notice any difference at all. It's not until you get to 6400 that noise is even noticeable, and even at 12,800, as you can see here, it's perfectly acceptable. One thing I really liked about the GFX 100 is that you can program all of the buttons and dials to do pretty much whatever you want, essentially customizing the camera to your own preference. In my personal opinion though, I think there are too many buttons on this camera. As a result, I turned off most of them so they did nothing. But another slight annoyance is that many of the buttons are totally unlabelled, which makes remembering what you set each one to do a more difficult task than it needs to be. Colour coding them would have been more useful rather than having to remember that the second button in from the right at the bottom of the rear-facing side of the camera is the one you assign to bring up the histogram. It'd be much easier just to remember that the blue button does that. Apertures are controlled on the lens itself, which is fine by me, as at least the aperture ring only controls aperture rather than doubling up as something else. This camera has a total of 3 screens, and each one can be assigned to display various options. I love the fact that I can set the secondary rear screen to show the histogram, as this then doesn't interfere with the image on the main screen. Talking of the main screen, this is a floppy, flappy, tilty affair, which I've not used once because, in my opinion, it's just another thing to break or go wrong. But I know some people get very excited by such toys, so here it is, flopping, flapping, tilting away. The camera is big, but I love big cameras. I don't understand it when I hear people want small cameras. Small cameras are a nightmare to use as all the buttons and dials are too close together. I can understand it when I hear people want a lighter camera, but lighter and bigger rarely work together. As it happens though, the GFX 100 is not as heavy as you would probably expect for its size. In fact, one of the biggest surprises was when I weighed the camera with a 63mm lens attached, which is equivalent to 50mm on a full frame camera, and it came in at almost exactly the same weight as the Canon 5DSR with a 50mm lens. You would expect the GFX 100 to be the weight of an elephant, but it's surprisingly light for its size. Talking of elephants, I think it's time to address the one that's in the room. Let's talk about sensor size. You may have noticed that I just mentioned that 63mm on this camera is equivalent to 50mm on a full frame. But that shouldn't make sense because 63 is only 26% bigger than 50, and we all know that medium format is much larger than that, right? Yeah, this is not really a medium format camera, is it? Yes, the sensor is bigger than full frame, but only by 26%. So that's like adding an inch to a chipolata and calling it a Cumberland. It's still actually a chipolata, just an inch longer. But hey, let's not get all hung up on size. I've been accused of that far too many times in the past. The fact is that this is a 102 megapixel camera on a sensor which is a quarter of the size bigger than a full frame sensor, and every bit of that is welcome. Focusing is super fast and accurate. Obviously, focusing on a landscape is not much of a challenge, but it handled a portrait session extremely well, consistently nailing focus on the eye, even though it was a dimly lit scene. I would have felt much more at home doing portraits while looking through a viewfinder, and if this thing had an optical viewfinder, then I would have been very happy. Is there any photos that you want to do? Is there anything that...
Well, I brought my part shoes.
See if you can go back a bit more, another step back. Trying to get the light on your phone, there we go, that's the one. No one is going to buy this camera for its frames per second burst rate. With 102 megapixels of information to capture for each exposure, it's never going to compete with the cameras designed for action photography. The maximum frame rate is only 3.2 per second, which by today's standards is snail-like in pace. But it's fast enough for portrait sessions and won't fill the memory card up in the blink of an eye. However, using the screen did encourage me to get into some viewpoints which I wouldn't have otherwise done. The GFX 100 has built-in image stabilization, which works extremely well. For these shots, I was typically using around 1/200th per second at ISO 1000. And the quality is testament to both the IBIS and the ISO performance, which has provided pin-sharp, smooth detail on Lex's eyes and face.
Right, and that's it, there we go.
To test the IBIS in a landscape situation, I handheld this shot at 1/4 of a second, just for a laugh, and it shows only a very slight reduction in sharpness over an identical tripod-mounted image. So you could trade in your tripod to part finance this camera. So is it really worth £10,000 for the body only? There are other so-called medium format digital options such as the Pentax 645Z, but this too falls far short of actually being true medium format in my opinion, and is only a mere 50 megapixels. Pah! To get true medium format of 100 megapixels upwards, you need to look at Phase 1 or Hasselblad options, which, wait for it, are going to set you back between £40,000 to £50,000. So when you look at it that way, you could argue that the Fuji GFX 100 is a bit of a bargain.
Okay, so put me down for 2. Now, I did manage to have a play with the camera before we had to send it back, and I must say it is a bit of a beast. Later in the show, I'll be doing a bit of medium format photography myself, but on a slightly different budget, my kind of budget. Anyway, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for giving us your feedback on the show. As I mentioned before, we do reply to all questions and read every message, so do feel free to comment down below. Now, one of the most common is that you want us to produce more than just one show per month, as you find the wait between shows just a bit long. Well, I might have the answer for you. MC2 Live is our monthly webinar service, which happens on the second Sunday of every month. It's very similar to this show, but with the additional buzz of being live. We edit images, we cover camera skills, critique your photos, and answer some of your questions as they come in from all over the world. Numbers are limited, and we do need to charge a small registration fee to cover costs, but it is well worth it if you're looking to advance your photography knowledge. And if you can't join us when we're live, then you can replay it at your leisure. If you want to know more, then just look at the link in the description down below. Alright, well now it's time to continue our countdown of the top 10 views in Skye.
Now, I don't know how this has happened, but as soon as the production team revealed that this mountain was our number 4 viewpoint on Skye, all of a sudden, all the other team members miraculously became unavailable. Marcus said he had to renew his membership at the local bingo hall. Harry said he had an appointment at the ladies' hair salon. Ruth, well, she suddenly claims she's afraid of heights. So I guess it's up to me to climb this 3,048-foot mountain. Still, I suppose it's not all that bad. I'm still well above sea level. Well, 4 foot above sea level. So only 3,044 feet to go then. I guess I better get on with it. The Highlands of Scotland is a mountainous area, and all the peaks over 3,000 feet are known as Munros, after the mountaineer Sir Hugh Munro first documented all 283 of them. Only 13 of these are outside mainland Scotland. Skye has 12, and these are considered the most challenging to summit. Renew my membership at the bingo hall? Honestly. Incidentally, the only Munro outside mainland Scotland which isn't on Skye is Ben More on the Isle of Mull, just in case it comes up in a general knowledge quiz. There are a couple of obvious routes to the summit of Blavin. The one I am taking is the shortest but steepest and starts from the John Muir car park on the shores of Loch Slappin. Look out for the scenic waterfall, which is less than half an hour into the hike, as it can be well worth stopping for a photo. A word of warning, you'll need to cross this river, which can be quite deep after significant rainfall, so bear this in mind. The steepest part of this route doesn't start until later in the ascent, leaving the first part of the trail to fool you into a false sense that you're doing reasonably well. Appointment at the hair salon? You better off going to the dog groomers. The views to the south get grander as you gain altitude, but the view we have come to see is to the north. This will only reveal itself once we reach the ridge, but this does add to the sense of anticipation. You see, it's what lies beyond that huge wall of rock that will keep driving you onwards and upwards. But for now, I'll just admire the view, take a wee rest and have something to eat. There are a couple of things to consider carefully before coming to see our number 4 view on our top 10 list. The first is to pay attention to weather. Only think about summiting a mountain like this if the conditions are suitable. And I don't just mean the conditions that are present when you arrive in the car park. You need to make sure that the cloud isn't going to come down while you're at altitude and shroud out the view before you get there, but more importantly, prevent you from navigating visually. The best weather site to use for this is the Mountain Weather Information Service, which we will add a link for in the description below. You also need to pay attention to the wind speed, as there's little point in standing on an elevated ridge if it's too windy to take a shot or even stand up. If you climb a mountain on the leeward side, it can really give you a false sense of security what the wind speed's like on the summit because you're sheltered from that wind. It's not really until you crest that summit when things can really become uncomfortable. The second thing to consider is the gear that you're taking. You only want to take the essential equipment, as carrying extra weight is going to slow you down and tire you out. One camera body and a couple of lenses are all you really need in terms of photo gear, but you'll also need to carry food and water plus other essentials. So I stripped out my camera bag this morning so I could only bring exactly what I needed with me today, so let me show you what I've got. Wide angle lens going from 16mm 35, 50mm prime and a 100 to 400mm zoom, and then of course I've got my first aid kit. So as well as the camera gear and the first aid kit, obviously essentials, food and water, so I've just got a couple of energy bars with me, I have a bottle of water in there, and also of course I have my tripod on the side of the bag. Okay, still got a little while to go, so let's get a move on. Expect the ascent to the summit to take around 3 hours, and expect to want to quit several times on the way. But if there's one thing that will keep you going, then it's this. Now that's an impressive view, truly world class. It would be easy to look at this view and assume it was somewhere in the Alps, especially in the winter months when much of the scene is covered in snow. This, however, is just a small island off the west coast of Scotland, but with views like this, it's easy to see why it attracts so many photographers from all over the world. Of the 12 Munros in Skye, 11 of them are all on the line, stretched out along the Cuillin Ridge. It's possible to conquer all 11 in a single day, but most people take 2. Blavin, the one I am standing on, is the only one not on the main ridge, but this is one of the reasons it provides such epic views. Down there is Glensligachen, which cuts through the centre of the Cuillin, a huge extinct volcano, dividing it between the black and red peaks. The black peaks are formed from gabbro and basalt and are jagged and rough in appearance, whereas the reds are formed from granite and are more rounded and smooth. Of all 283 Munros in Scotland, the most difficult is aptly named the Inaccessible Pinnacle, or the In Pin if you want to sound cool. From here you can just about see it, a sharp splinter of rock sticking up. With its 360-degree panoramic views, you'll be spoilt for choice when deciding which direction to point your lens in. My favourite views are to the north, as the peaks are closer and therefore less affected by atmospheric haze. My advice would be to look for features such as these rocks, which you can shoot through and frame the distant view nicely. If you shoot the distant view on its own, the image can look very two-dimensional. The views go on, and you'll want to stay forever. But once you've filled up your memory cards, it'll be time to say goodbye and start the long descent back to the car park.
So that leaves us with only 3 to go. Any guesses what they might be? Feel free to let us know in the comment section if you think you do. Now, whether you're familiar with Skye or not, if you are planning a visit here with your camera at any point, then I can highly recommend this. It's the Photographer's Guide to Skye. Now, it features what we consider to be the top 50 locations on the island, although not in order, and it's available in both hard copy and PDF download from the relevant link down below, so do check that out. Now, in our first ever programme earlier this year, we started a feature called Mission Possible, where we take ambitious photo ideas and attempt to turn them into reality. Our first one was about as ambitious as we hope to get, which is why we're still working on it. December is our next opportunity for that, by the way. But we thought we'd get another one on the go, one which is hopefully a little bit more achievable. Now, the idea for this one came to me when I saw a sorry-looking abandoned bulldozer not far from my home, so I thought I'd give one of the team the task of bringing it back to life in a photo. So, this is it up here.
Okay.
I drive past the road every couple of nights and I saw it and I thought, It looks so sorry for itself. But I reckon we could do something really special with this.
Yeah, it's certainly got a lot of potential. In fact, funnily, I think that I've seen this as well driving past, because the headlights catch it at night when you're driving from that way. So the first thing to do here is to find out the best angle. And I think I pretty much know what that is immediately, but I'll talk you through all the options just so you know what I'm thinking in my head. Just get a camera out. So it almost looks like it's got a face, doesn't it? With two eyes and a nose.
Very sad face.
Yeah. So we definitely want to make that a feature. But if you walk over here and look at it head on, then it becomes very two-dimensional because we can't see any other side other than the front side. So what we need to do is we need to either shoot it from 45 degrees that way or from 45 degrees that way, so we can see the front and one side of it.
Yeah.
Now, because of the background, I think that this way is probably going to be worse than the other way, but we'll try both to see. So that's from there, and then we'll go over and do this one here. Yeah, so this one is immediately sort of singing to me, basically. It's just cleaner, the background's better, it's more interesting with the rolling hills, whereas just that's a bit
slightly more
boring
impressive.
and barren. So that's from here.
Yeah.
And that's from there. So the background's immediately better, isn't
Definitely.
it? Yeah. So once we've got our angle, it's then a case of finding our distance. So we've got two options here. We can either go very close with a wide angle lens, or we can go further back with a longer lens. So we want this to be about the tractor and not about the background.
Sure.
So my instinct is telling us that we want to be reasonably close. But if we go too close, let's go. So if I go to here, for example, you can see what happens. It becomes all distorted.
Yeah.
And it loses some of its character, doesn't it? So if we come back a little bit until we just... So that's keeping it a lot more natural to how it looks with the eye. The last thing we want to do is the height. I think we want to get down low, because what that will do is it will make, it puts us on level with what we perceive as being the eyes. It's the same as when you photograph a child or a dog or something. If you get down on eye level, you just get a more personal connection. So if you look at the difference here, so that's from head height and that's from low down. So that's definitely better. In terms of light, I mean, it feels like the sun's about to come out, but my instincts are telling me that this wants to be done at twilight with lights. Yeah. To bring it back to life, because at the moment it's looking obviously very dead.
Quite sad,
But if we can get some lights, illuminating it from the outside, and we can paint it with a torch as well, to kind of bring out certain areas. So you can only do painting with light on a long exposure, so it has to be done at night. And I'm also thinking about putting some lights inside the cabin as well.
Inside?
Yeah, if we can get in there, can you?
Potentially. Whoa, yes. Do you want a hand?
The central locking on this isn't much good, is it? Let's just put that camera down. The door's attached at the back there.
It is.
So hang on, let me... There we go. So if we were to have a flash unit in here, just to fire a load of light up and just illuminate the inside, that could work.
That would look spectacular with the shattered windscreen, I think.
Yeah, because the light will come out of the windows. But I'll tell you what that will do, which will be a negative thing, is that it will take the emphasis away from these headlights, which we've already spoken about being the eyes.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do that, we need to also put lights into here. If you get bright torches in those areas there, a flash inside to illuminate it all, and then what we can do is with another couple of torches, we probably need a couple of people here to help us, we can paint with light key areas and just do a trial and error and just see how it looks, and then we can keep on taking the photo, adjusting the light as necessary. We would need to name it as well. If I had to name it now, I'd call it Derek.
Derek? You think it looks like a Derek?
I think it looks like a Derek.
I'm thinking more of a, Bertie or something like that. We'll come up with a good one.
So what we need to do is we need to come back, we need to get 1, 2, probably 3, 4 torches, high-powered torches, 2 for the headlights and 2 for lighting it. We could also probably position a vehicle over there with the full beam on.
Okay.
To give it some illumination from a long way away,
Yeah.
because the problem with torches is when you light it from close up, you get hot spots, whereas a long way away, it'll be a much more
Better
even
coverage.
light.
Sure.
And then we'll see how we get on. And it's, you know, all these things are trial and error, but if we don't get it right first time, we'll come back and we'll get it better the second time, and we'll just keep on going until we're happy with it. But I reckon this is not too ambitious compared to other stuff that I've done, and I reckon we'll get this on the first go, as long as the weather plays ball and it doesn't start raining halfway through or something. So we'll see how we get on. So we'll just come back and continue this another day.
Excellent. Well, Bertie, you're about to come back to life, I think.
It's officially Bertie.
It's Bertie, definitely. All right, let's see if I can get the door back on.
Don't forget to lock it.
Yeah. Solid as a rock. Find out how we got on later on in the show. Now, if you've ever been to Scotland, then you'll already know that it's one of the most dramatic countries in the world for photography. With a huge diversity of landscapes, wildlife and culture on offer, it's absolutely no surprise that it draws photographers from all over the world. And to celebrate this, there is a brand new photo competition, Scotland's Photo of the Year. With over £4,000 worth of prizes, including a £2,000 cash prize for the overall winner, this is a competition well worth entering if you have any photos which you think show off Scotland. In fact, just this week the prize fund has been added to with the inclusion of Case Filters, providing £300 worth of gear for the winners. The competition is open now with a deadline not until October, and I'm lucky enough to be one of the judges. So if you think that you can impress me, which is actually quite easily done, then you'll find all the details you need in the link section down below.
This month I'm going to show you how to adjust colour in Adobe Lightroom. So we've got a lovely image of the sun setting out in Utah on these rock formations. So I've already applied a few basic adjustments to this image, but when I took the shot, the colour was a little punchier across these rocks. So we could adjust the vibrance, we could adjust the saturation, but first of all, let's just have a quick look at the difference. If we adjust vibrance, what that will do is it will enhance any muted colours in your scene. So at the moment, the blues in the sky are probably the most muted tone. So if I bring that up, it's going to make the sky look far too saturated. Saturation is a bit more of an aggressive adjustment, and that will saturate every colour channel, no matter how muted it is in our picture. And again, that's a little bit too much for this image. So let's just reset that. Instead, what I'm going to come down is to our color tab just down here. Now we can selectively enhance just individual color channels. Now across these rocks here, it's a mix of red and orange light. So I think we'll start off with the oranges just here, and I can just bring up the saturation of those and up to about 40–50%. It's going to be absolutely fine. We can also adjust the brightness of that color, the luminance a little bit, just to make that pop. And we can also do the same just with the reds. Now we could go through and selectively play with the color in the whole of this image and the different channels, but that's for another time, as for now my 60 seconds is up.
Now, each month we bring you a photography quote, and this month's is from Henry Cartier-Bresson, who once said, "Your first 10,000 photographs are your worst," which gives me some hope at least. One thing which will help improve your photography though is to take control of exposure yourself, and so with this in mind we've been doing a 4-part feature on mastering exposure. Now in previous shows we've looked at how to measure the dynamic range of your camera and how to use your camera's exposure meter. Now it's time for part 3, where photographer James Brew explains the benefits of using your camera's histogram. Now we did get a few messages last month from viewers complaining that Harry didn't actually destroy anything in our July show, so we've given him a starring role in this one. Enjoy.
So far in our Mastering Exposure series, we've explained all about the dynamic range of a scene and how this relates to that of our camera. In last month's show we showed you how to use the exposure meter in your camera and explained why it can so easily lead you to make errors with your exposures. It was certainly a lot of information to take on board, but the good news is that today I'm going to be showing you how to master exposure using your camera's histogram. Why is this good news? Well, it's because it's super easy compared to all of this one stop over, two stop under, where's my mid-tone malarkey. If you're not familiar with what a histogram is, don't worry. Even though it sounds like an unpleasant procedure you might have in an A&E department of a hospital with your legs up in the air, it's actually a graph on your digital camera, which makes the art of exposure a walk in the park. If you can drive a car, then you can expose a histogram. Let me explain. Let's assume we are driving down a road which is 10 meters wide and we have a stone wall on either side. As we drive down the road, if the car gets a little too close to the left-hand wall, we simply adjust the steering wheel to position the car a little further to the right, back in the middle of the road. The smaller your car, the more room you have for error. If your car is only 4 meters wide, then you have 3 meters on either side before you scrape the wall. But if your vehicle is 8 meters wide, then you need to start concentrating a little more. The same principles apply when using a camera's histogram, but the good news is you don't need to keep a lookout for anything coming in the opposite direction. A histogram is simply a graph which shows which tones your image is made up from. Starting from the left-hand edge, this is pure black and represents the lower limit of your camera to record detail. Then as you move across the graph from left to right, the tones get brighter and brighter, passing a mid-tone in the centre, and then ending up at pure white when you reach the right-hand edge, which is the upper limit of your camera's ability to record highlight detail. The gap between the left-hand edge and the right-hand edge is your camera's dynamic range. So when you take a photo, the camera will display the tones which make up that image on a graph. If the graph is too far over to the left, all you need to do is make the image brighter and you'll see that the graph moves towards the right. If the image is too bright, the graph will be too far to the right, so you just need to darken the exposure to bring the graph back towards the centre. As you can see, it's just like driving a car. We're simply trying to prevent the graph from touching the left and right hand edges in the same way we're trying to prevent our vehicle from touching the walls. The greater the dynamic range of a scene, or the wider our car, the more accurate we need to be with our exposure, or with our steering. If after watching part 1 of this series you worked out that your camera has a dynamic range of 10 stops, and you're wanting to shoot a scene that has a dynamic range of 12 stops, so that's the difference between the darkest and the brightest areas in your scene, you've got a problem in the same way that you would have if you wanted to drive a 12 meter wide vehicle down a 10 meter wide road. I can tell you now, that's not going to fit. So what can we do? Let's stay with our steering the car down the road scenario. We try to keep the car in the middle of the road, then we're going to take out both our wing mirrors and we're going to put scratches and dents down both sides of the car. I can tell you now that's not going to end well. To reduce our repair bill, we could decide to just destroy the left side of the vehicle by driving as close to the right-hand wall as possible without making contact with it. Now we've halved our repair bill by only destroying one side of the vehicle. It's the same with exposure. We simply need to decide whether we're going to sacrifice our shadows or our highlights, as we can't possibly retain detail in both. That's our job as a photographer, and it's one of the main reasons why using your camera in anything other than manual mode is simply removing your hands from the steering wheel of the car. You become a passenger. In most landscape situations, we sacrifice the shadows in favour of keeping details in the highlights. This is because the sky is often a key part of the scene, so it's important that we keep detail in this area. There are of course exceptions, and don't be afraid to burn out your highlights if you require more shadow detail in a scene with high dynamic range. If your histogram touches the top of the graph box, this doesn't matter. It simply means your scene is made up of lots of that particular tone. It's the sides you need to pay attention to. as once your graph touches these, your camera is no longer recording detail in the darkest or brightest tones, depending which side of the graph you are touching. Now what I've showed you so far is the luminance histogram, which is usually displayed as white or grey. But there's also red, green and blue histograms, which are averaged out to generate the luminance histogram. 95% of the time the luminance histogram will suffice, and you won't need to be concerned about the RGB ones. But if you are photographing a scene where one colour is strongly dominating, like this sunrise which is made up primarily of red tones, then the luminance histogram, which is averaging out the red with the other two colours, may indicate that you are not touching the right hand side of the graph. But if you then check the red histogram, you will see that you are in fact losing highlight detail after all. Just something to be aware of. Using the histogram on your digital camera is by far the easiest method of exposure. It shows you in one graph the dynamic range of your camera in relation to the dynamic range of the scene. All the information you need is right there. Don't worry if the image on the back of the camera looks too dark or too light. If the histogram looks good, your camera has recorded all the essential detail, which can then be revealed at the post-processing stage. And don't worry if the camera's exposure meter is saying your image is under or overexposed, as it doesn't know what you are photographing, so you can totally ignore that if you like. It essentially becomes redundant if using the histogram, which is hopefully good news if you want to simplify the process of manual exposure. And don't think that a good histogram should always be balanced. It shouldn't. If you're shooting a predominantly bright scene such as a snow-covered landscape, then your histogram should be loaded to the right. If you're shooting a predominantly dark subject, then your histogram should be loaded to the left. A good histogram will only be evenly balanced if your scene has equal amounts of shadow and highlight, with midtones present too. If you see a U-shaped histogram, this means your scene is a high contrast one, full of bright and dark tones with little in the midtones. If your histogram looks like a hill or a mountain, this simply means you are shooting a low contrast scene, predominantly made up of midtones. It really is that easy. All you need to do is point your camera at the scene and take a test shot. You can use your camera's exposure meter to get you in the right area by making it show 0. The exposure it thinks is the correct one. Now examine the histogram of the shot. Remember the analogy with steering the car and either darken or brighten the exposure to ensure the graph is positioned as you want it. Then take your final image and your exposure will be perfect every time. Next month we'll be looking at how to use a handheld light meter to measure both incident and reflected light. Join us for that. For now, I'm going to try and drive my car back home without touching the sides.
Having recently reversed into my dad's stationary car, it doesn't bode well for me using the histogram, does it? But I am sure that was useful information which you can all put to good effect. In our final part of Mastering Exposure, we'll be looking at how to use one of these, a handheld light meter. But even if you don't have one or don't want one, there will be plenty of generic exposure information in there as well, which can be applied to many situations, so do check that out on next month's show. Now, one place you would expect to find a handheld light meter is in the bags of most film photographers, which brings us nicely into our next feature, Analog Affairs. Armed with only a roll of film and a newly acquired rangefinder camera, I recently went out to see what I could find in my local area. Most things in life tend to come around in cycles. Flared trousers, vinyl records, home baking, silly hairstyles. Okay, well let's hope that never comes back. One thing which is currently seeing a massive resurgence in popularity is film photography. After falling victim to the digital revolution, analogue is bouncing back, with some of the major film companies even launching new products. I'm not new to shooting film, but I fancied practicing some digital distancing, so went for a wander with my camera, which was made in the 1980s, a decade which gave us so many great things, myself included. So although there are many different types of film, there's only really three common formats. You've got your 35mm, which is the smallest and definitely the most convenient, because it's basically a big long roll of film that winds up into a cartridge, so these are great. On the other end of the scale, represented here by a piece of paper, because I don't actually have one, there is the large format, which gives you superior image quality but does come at a price because every sheet costs quite a few pounds. And then right in the middle, what I like to think of as the best of both worlds is this. It's the medium format film. Now this is all the convenience of the 35mm, because again it winds up into a cartridge but does have superior image quality, so that's what I'm going to be using today. Now I'm using the 645 today. This is my wee Fuji, as I like to call it, and with this film in here I will get about 15 or 16 images on the roll, but depending on what camera you actually put the medium format in, and this is quite unique, you'll get a different amount of images, so very much looking forward to seeing what I can capture with this today. So I'm still getting acquainted with my wee Fuji, so I've come out here to get to know it a little bit better. This is not far at all from where I live and it's full of history. If anybody knows anything about Scottish history, you've heard of Bonnie Prince Charlie and Flora MacDonald, and Flora MacDonald actually used to live here. That's actually a little known fact. So we've come out here, there's some great viewpoints, and I'm really looking forward to using this and just seeing what I can find. Just in case you're wondering, this isn't actually a tutorial because I don't know what I'm doing very much. I brought you along for moral support and maybe to inspire you a wee bit as well. Just gonna have a look at some of the epic viewpoints actually. Look at this. Oh. Now, something I always get wrong on this camera, and I think it's the same with all the different 645s. When you hold it the normal way up, which is to say landscape, it's actually not landscape. It's like an upright in the frame, so if you want to do landscape, you actually have to turn it around. Slightly counterintuitive, but you will get used to it, I've been told. So I'm all set up for another shot here. The clouds are actually looking absolutely gorgeous, nice and blue behind the house. Just waiting again for the light to come out, but I think I'm about good to go. I've got f/22 on here. The house is the furthest thing I want to be in focus. At the front, the wall, so about a third of the way in between is what I'm focusing on. The foxglove's kind of in the middle of the house here. And the focus ring on the front is what I'm going to be using to judge focus. This actually has obviously focusing inside, but it's a rangefinder. It's not very accurate, so I have been told that it's best to judge it by eye. So guessing around about 4 or 5 meters in there. So I've set the focus ring on the front to that, and I'm just going to wait for the light to come out. While I am waiting though, one quirky thing about this camera, which I love, it's got a selfie mode, which is absolutely fantastic. It's got a little lever down on the front here, which I'll show you. This is a nifty device which makes the process of exposure much easier. It's a Voigtlander VC Meter 2, and this one's been lent to me by Ford's Photographic. It simply fits onto any hot shoe and away you go. Alright, so I reckon I need something around about f11 for this shot. Just press the button here and then adjust it till the green light appears. There is a 500th of a second, so let me just adjust this. Now, an easy mistake to make is to think that when you've got it right here, you've actually set it. This isn't attached to the camera, so you need to make sure and replicate the settings on the front. So there we go, f11, 1/500th, and make sure the camera is the right way around. Alright, well I've got that shot, but I'm just going to stay here for a few minutes longer because there's actually a patch of blue sky that's just coming, so I'm going to think of maybe getting another shot with just some better light on it. It's all about patience, as we've learnt. One of the reasons why film photography has become so popular, particularly among the younger generations, is that it's more affordable than ever. You can pick up a decent medium format film camera for around £200 upwards, and if you get a rangefinder like mine, the lens is included, so that's all you need. Well, I reckon we've seen the last of the sun, so I'm just going to have a wee wander around the rest of the building and see if I can find some different viewpoints. Oh, what a great noise. That's something I really miss about digital, by the way. It's just feels good, doesn't it, winding it on? All right, well that's me filmed all 15 or 16 possibly shots, can't quite remember. So off home now to see if I can develop these and see what we've got. If you picked up photography after the heyday of film, then I do encourage you to try out an analog camera for yourself. Not being able to see your results straight away forces you to be more deliberate and thoughtful before you press the shutter, which can only be a good thing, regardless of what type of camera you use. Now, talking of a shot which requires a lot of thought and planning, let's head back to the scrapyard as we put an old-timer back into the spotlight, or in this case, spotlights. All right, so I've been thinking, and I reckon maybe you were right.
What, again?
Yeah, I think it does look like a Derek. What do you reckon, Derek the dozer?
Well, yeah, that's why I suggested it. It's, like, it's all the Ds. I mean, it's just not a Bertie, is it? Let's be fair.
No, you're right. It's definitely a Derek.
Okay, good. Right, so what's that? 7-0 to me then?
Something like that, yeah.
Right, so since we were here last time, because we worked out that the position was down here, and last time I was using a Canon 5D Mark IV and a 35mm prime lens. Problem with that is it's at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right.
So we're going to shoot this on a Fuji X-T4
okay.
with a 23mm lens, which is exactly the same focal length, but it's also an f1.4 because that's what we need. We need the speed.
All right,
because when it gets darker. So never used this camera before, so it'll be interesting to see how it
am I right in thinking this is a mirrorless?
Yeah, all right, don't swear. Yes, I am going to be using a mirrorless, everybody. Let's get set up then. So we need to get some lights going on in the headlights to bring Derek alive.
All right.
So if my recollection is correct, we were about here because we were looking at it from an angle.
That's right.
How long ago was it when we were last here, by the way? Must be nearly a year.
I think it was last summer.
And yet we don't look a day older.
This is true.
It's amazing. Well, I don't. All right, okay, so if we line this up, I'm not going to look through there. I refuse to. Let's turn the screen on. How do you do that? Oh, there we go. So yeah, that looks pretty good, doesn't it?
That looks about right.
How do we make it brighter on here? There we go. So composition-wise, that looks all okay. The sky's fantastic. Look, if I make that a bit darker, you'll kind of see loads of detail in the sky. So can't really ask for a better sky. So what we need to do now is work out how to get lights into the two main headlights. Yeah. And I'm also thinking of putting another light underneath, shining out from underneath the two tracks, just to look, so it looks like it's almost like, you know, floating on a bed of light. We're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 torches. We can use the car headlights.
Oh, excellent.
Parked over there.
Yeah.
To kind of give the whole scene a bit of illumination, and then we're going to need flash inside. Yep. And you're going to have to paint with the light one of the torches. The rest will just be on all the time.
Fantastic. He's about to come back to life.
Yeah. For one night only, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Derek. I'm thinking that this whole feature is called Mission Possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's make it a little bit more challenging. Let's throw in reciprocity failure as well and get it on the film. So we've got the two lights in. Are you ready to turn him on? I would do it, but I'm no good at turning men on. Be careful where I put my hand.
Anytime you're ready, like. There he is. Bit of life in him.
Okay. you want him to look a bit googly-eyed, really, don't you?
Yeah.
And then what we'll do is I'll angle my car down there with the full beams or the headlights shining up to give us our kind of global light.
Excellent.
And these will just be hotspots. And then we'll get you probably standing over here, painting with another tool, painting in the shadows. And then we need flash inside. I've got a flash unit here.
Yeah. So how are you going to get that to fire?
Well, because we're using a Fuji camera and this is a Canon flash, the only thing I can think of is that we're going to need a small person to sit in here.
Okay, I'm not going in there.
You rang?
Ah, perfect. There we go. Small person. If you get in there, Harry, into position, not the first time you've got inside Derek, I'm sure. I'm going to close the door on you if that's all right. While you're over there, can you turn on the headlight? Just activate this rear light. So it's still too bright at the moment, but it's all good practice. But the lights look good at the front. That's the main thing. Everything else we've got control of. Okay, Harry.
Yeah.
You ready for a test flash?
Yeah.
Is it all charged?
Yeah, good to go.
3, 2, 1, 0. Right, we've got a big shadow coming from somewhere on this side. So let me just work out where it's coming from. What I think you need to do is put the reflector on the back so it's facing forwards and fire it backwards. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, that's better. Okay, we're getting to the right kind of light now.
This has got worse legroom than BA economy.
Tell you what, Harry.
Yeah.
Just for experiment purposes, just put it on like full power just to see what happens. 3, 2, 1, go. I mean, it's quite nice, it's just different. Ruth, what we'll get you to do is get you to stand over here and just light this side as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so don't worry about getting the back. You just want to get the front. Yeah, just try not to catch the camera because it will flare in the lens. Yeah. Don't be premature, Harry. When you're firing. 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah, that's much better where you are, Ruth.
Great.
Yeah, much better. All right, let's get that on film before we go any further. Okay, this is only a 1 second exposure on the film this time, so you have to be right on 0, okay? Yeah. 3, 2, 1, go. Nice. Just try one without flash at all. Yeah. I'm going to try something really daring. I'm going to take 2 photos at the same time. How's that? Both hands being used. Okay. The film's done.
Excellent.
I think we're good to go.
So I hope you've enjoyed this month's show, and if you have, please do let us know in the comments, and also give us a thumbs up if you can. The production crew works so hard behind the scenes on every show and always appreciate your feedback. Now, last month we did promise to show you the processes involved in super-sized printing, and we will be bringing you that in a future show, but time has caught up with us for this month. If you can't wait another month, do remember our webinar, which happens in the middle of every month. Check out the link below to register. Next month, join me on some of the world's most beautiful beaches as we bring you the show from the Outer Hebrides, a place which is becoming ever more popular for photographers. So I'm off to get some sun cream and dig out my deck chair. Until then, take good care, but most of all, take good photos.